Hello, I'm Pastor Dave, and this is your 3-minute Monday morning sermon recap. Here we go. Recent weeks, months, and, well, really years have shown that we seem to have a problem living in peace with one another as a country. In one way, this reminds us of our need for confession and our need for God's grace in our life through Jesus Christ. Yet, as we look at those words of invitation to confession, we really need to seek to live out those words. And part of that is really living in peace with one another. So to start out with, we have to realize what peace is. One way of looking at it is peace in all of its forms, whether external or internal, is the absence of conflict. Whether it's between nations, between groups, within ourselves, peace is that absence of conflict. Yet, to fully understand peace, we also have to understand conflict itself, what it is, where it comes from, and how we interact with it. At its core, conflict is animosity between two entities. There's something off between the two. Whether it's between two groups of people, two nations, or even two thoughts within oneself. There's a disagreement that leads to a separation and a degree of strong dislike that, if it goes unchecked, can lead to it becoming hatred, which is something we as Christians should never have as part of our lives. But we can allow this to happen because one of the sources of it is elsewhere. Because conflict is fueled from outside sources. It's not something that just magically pops up. There are outside factors that feed it, whether it's fear of another people, messages from others. It leads to an increase in that animosity, which, if left unchecked, will just continue to build and build. And the thing about conflict is that we really do it to ourselves. We choose to internalize the conflict and make it our own. I mean, many of the things that actually divide us and drive us apart don't actually impact us directly. But oftentimes it's those other people, it's the other outside forces that drive it up and say, this is important, this needs to be fought over. But until we choose to actually make it an issue for us, to internalize it, it's meaningless. But once you bring it in and that fuel keeps building and building, we can see where our problems at living in peace with one another lie. And none of this is what we're supposed to do. Christ calls on us to remove conflict and hatred from our hearts and our lives. And in doing so, remove it from the world as a whole. Because we are not called to hate. We are not called to seek the temporal power in this world. We are not called to drive away those who disagree with us, or to separate ourselves from one another, because the mission of Christ is to build the church, to make disciples of all people, and we cannot do that when we drive others away. Instead, we need to embrace Christ's teachings in our lives and live out our faith, so when we see Christ, we will go without being embarrassed at where we failed to do what he told us to do. So that's your recap this week. Went a little over 3 minutes. But remember, we are still worshiping at 8:45 at East Salem and Otterbein at 10:15. We live stream the East Salem service at 8:45 on Sunday mornings. But until next time, I'm Pastor Dave, and one of these days, I hope to see you all back in the pews.